Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. I am your host, Heather Quick. I am an attorney, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Florida Women's Law Group, the only divorce firm for women by women. I love thinking big, thinking outside the box, creating creative solutions for women, and empowering women to win in all aspects of their life. Our approach at Florida Women's Law Group is to provide women with a strategy to not only achieve their objectives, but win at life. I believe that what may show up as adversity is simply an opportunity to change and improve your life. In each episode, I sit down with innovative professionals and leaders who are focused on how you can be your best self before, during, and after divorce. In these conversations, we are looking at how women can win at life. I have the unique opportunity to meet women when they are at a transition period of life. But that is only the beginning to becoming your best self and winning at life on your terms. With our guests, we enjoy the opportunity to explore ways all women can win and enhance their life, no matter where they are in their journey. Because divorce is just a point in life, not the end and not what defines you, rather a catalyst for your growth. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today we have a repeat guest. Yay, always my favorite because it was so good the first time that we're bringing her back, and that is Melissa Dionne. Melissa is the principal owner and licensed clinical social worker of Jack's Beach Counseling here in Jacksonville, Florida. Thank you, Melissa, for coming back on the show.
Well, thanks, Heather. And I'm so happy to be back. And thank you for calling me back to kind of get more information about what we have talked about before. And I'm glad I got the invite. So thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And today, for our listeners, we are going to be discussing co-parenting and dating after, and being in a relationship with a narcissist, or, being subject to that narcissistic abuse that we've certainly talked about on prior shows. And, now we're here to help our listeners know there is life after marriage to a narcissist, right, Melissa?
For sure, there is. And I, we'll come back to this more at the end, but kind of like there is a very joyful life to be had after all of this. And that's important to remember.
Absolutely. And yes, for our listeners, that is so important, especially if you're in it right now and you're wondering, right, if it's ever going to end or what can I do? Now, when Melissa, you were on the show about a year ago, episode 66. So for our listeners, if you like this and what we're talking about, please go back and listen. But I do, for those listeners who haven't heard that prior episode, Melissa, could you just tell them a little bit about what a clinical or a licensed clinical social worker is?
I certainly will. And I want to thank you, Heather. I mean, I just want to start with this saying I at least get 2 calls a week from that podcast. At least. So I want you to know it is making a difference. And so that's why I'm doing it. And obviously that's why you're doing it. And so it's obviously, working and people are hearing it and listening and can relate to things. And so getting help is what's most important. So what I do, I am a licensed clinical social worker, which means I got a master's in social work. The focus being, because as a master's in social work, you can go a couple of different tracks, and I chose the clinical track. So that means more around mental health, counseling, anything that's clinically based, counseling, therapy, and the like. And a lot of my experiences as a young clinician were in psychiatric hospitals, were in residential settings. I was exposed early on to what mental illness looked like. So I do feel like I have like a strong background, not just in the outpatient practice, but what it looks like, inside it. And what's interesting is I had such an exposure to it, yet I found myself being involved, in 2 relationships that I didn't recognize as being mental illness. So I just an interesting, I'm just honestly processing that as I'm saying this to you, that the majority of my background in the very beginning was very focused on psychiatric hospitals and the like. So a lot of people miss that internship piece. They might just go straight to private practice and things like that, which means you're kind of not in the trenches of kind of the more intense psychiatric illnesses.
Well, and that's great. And I'm sure that just gives you so much more experience to see and, work with patients who have, obviously serious mental health issues. If we're talking about, in hospitalization type psychiatric care. Now, through your training and clinicals and everything, was there a point where you really began to focus or specialize in really what you wanted to do with your training?
So this is such a great question. And I have definitely evolved, and my practice initially was very focused on child-centered play therapy. I mean, that was from 1999, but then even when I came back to private practice, I focused more on family systems and seeing kids, teenagers, to 20-year-olds. However, what happened was I got divorced and then got into another brief marriage that kind of smacked me in the face on what is going on. And having been, and I explained this, the last podcast, multiple therapists were on board with this particular relationship. And not one person said, hey, do you think you could be in an abusive relationship? Or do you think you could be, with somebody who has a personality disorder? So I think it was, it definitely during my stage, I guess, of pain and loss and trying to figure it all out, grieving the loss. Without going into the weeds on this, kind of the reason the relationship ended for both of them was due to infidelity, right? So that was the cause. But in the end, that wasn't the only piece of it. So the therapists were also focused on the unfaithful portion of it, not really the bigger picture, because that's honestly, the infidelity is just a symptom of what the real problem is. Right. So, but they're so focused. And so I knew something was bigger than this. At this point, round 2 of this is me getting very focused on anything that I can read, any person's information I can find. And as I spoke to you last time, Sandra Brown's work really is what was the light is bulb turned on. And she really is the pioneer of pathological love relationships, narcissistic abusive relationships, survivors of narcissism, just all of this kind of stuff. So I have done not even all of her trainings, because there are so many, and there's a certification that comes with it because you have to be trained in trauma, which I am, multiple different kinds of trauma, but also she has kind of created this guideline for recognizing it in practice and step-by-step kind of how to deal with the survivors and all of that. So I've done a lot of it, but I haven't done all of it. It will happen, but it's, it's a lot of work too. So yeah, that is how my story came about.
Well, I'm so glad that you do focus on it and, do help. I mean, I'm thinking you're helping mostly women in narcissistic relationships. But do you help? I mean, or do you just help whoever comes to you?
No, I mean, statistically, you can look this up. I think the stat is like 80% tend to be men, but I definitely have where it is turned more into, so yes, a few male patients where this exact thing is happening and it's the woman, but typically the addiction, I'm not saying infidelity wasn't a part of it, because it could have been, but it tended to be more drugs and alcohol was what we knew.
Right.
You don't know what you don't know, but of what was discovered. So that it probably came in more of that, and them refusing to get treatment or get help. And then you kind of take it a step further. And let me say this, like, you can't, as a clinician, this is where it gets really tricky. If I just see the survivor, I can't technically diagnose somebody I have not seen. I can only go by the the symptoms of what they come in. And, so it doesn't change me saying they're survivor of this, of abuse, which is what it is, no matter what their diagnosis is, that is what's going on. So that part you can clearly define, there's criteria for it. But so I just wanted to clarify that for listeners.
Okay. That's great. That's so helpful. And, since we kind of jumped right in a little bit as to your work and where you spent, focus now, a lot for your patients, but, could you just give like a very high level overview for our listeners as far as what defines maybe narcissistic behavior? Most of them are probably going to know because there has been a lot of information on the show, but it's always good to hear it again and give us a little bit of that background and definition.
Right. And so we talked about this last time, and I'm going to go back and say kind of some similar things, which is, remember, it's on a continuum. And to say that somebody has narcissistic characteristics, as pop culture might call it, is not the same as somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder. And I know you're going to be like, well, you guys in the mental health field, but it is important to make the difference, right? Like everybody has a little bit of selfishness in them. We're not all MPD diagnostically, meet that criteria. So it's just really important, and to understand that it is on a continuum. Like, you have at one end characteristics of narcissism, and all the way at the other end, like psychopathy, sociopaths. So MPD personality disorders are kind of more in the middle of that. They have to meet criteria. So symptoms that you may notice, and let's always go to the really easy one, or easiest one, I guess, to look at, which is the lack of empathy. So that's a key marker. However, and I'm not going to go too much into it here, but remember, if it's a covert narcissist, they're going to learn cognitive empathy, which means they're going to pretend like they have empathy. And this is the part that makes them the most dangerous in certain aspects of narcissism, because you just can't see it. They have learned, the clinicians, they've been in relationships with, mental health people, that they learn how to pretend like they have empathy. But back to what do they, what states criteria for, an MPD would be, they are very fragile egos. They cannot handle being criticized. Typically, if you do criticize them, they blow up or they have meltdowns. A disregard for other people's feelings, need for admiration, and an inflated sense of self-importance. But again, that also can be more covert. They may pretend like they're more humble, but really inside, they're thinking something different. And I actually pulled an article. If you want to sit with me for 2 seconds to read it, it's basically a short paragraph that someone diagnosed with MPD wrote of like what his brain is actually thinking. So like the covert narc that pretends like they are this loving, kind, caring person and love bombing you, this is actually what they're thinking in their brain. Do you want me to read it?
Yes, please do. Please do. Okay. Yes, I'm anxious to hear it.
So this is a post, and he says, oh boy, this is going to be slightly darker than my usual post. I get cold, detached. I don't retract my remarks nor play them off as jokes. I've lost all interest in you. So these are his internal thinkings. You bore me and you serve no purpose to me anymore, whether it's sex, supply, or anything else for that matter. I've absolutely no need to mask up for you, no need for my filter words, no need to charm. So this is when they're coming out of the love bombing. It's going more into the devaluing phase. No need to be friendly, and definitely no need to impress. It's probably the most honest you'll ever see me. Everything I say and do are completely unfiltered from the second the thought comes to my head to the moment it leaves my mouth. Nothing I say to you will be warm, nothing will be playful, nothing will be comforting. So they know the difference.
Yeah, they're very smart, right? Yes, they're smart.
You are worthless and unworthy of my time and energy. This is what they're actually thinking. I'll have no qualms about hiding that fact from you. I'll have no qualms about hiding that fact from you. I'll get everyone we both mutually know to think you're the problem. We've talked about this smear campaign.
Yes.
I'll point out all your flaws with a fine-tooth comb and even fabricate my own while insinuating you're mentally unstable and even a narcissist yourself. That does happen.
Yes.
Leaving you feeling completely isolated, unloved, and insignificant. And that is why women kill themselves.
Ugh.
The thing is that 70-90% of people I talk to have no idea what little moral code I have or even think even think that I'm like this. I've openly told someone once that I have NPD and ASPD, antisocial personality disorder. And they still don't believe me to this day that I could do anything like that because I'm the nicest and most caring guy they know, and they couldn't see it. The funny thing is that even in some of my comments on Quora, I have people questioning it. So anything you say against me will only make you look worse. I just thought it was powerful, a powerful read. There are other narcissists who have been clinically diagnosed and they're on YouTube and stuff. I read sometimes things like that to patients more as psychoeducation to understand, because in cognitive dissonance, which is that word that we use to describe when they still believe that person that first showed up to the person that they are now. And the person they are now is the not nice person, the mean person, in just layman's terms, right? So sometimes when you read things like that, it just kind of starts turning, that brain chemistry on to kind of disconnect from that love bombing, to understand that that is actually what they're thinking. What they're saying to others is something totally different. So it's sometimes those moments like that are really helpful in therapy. And those are things that I wish I had gotten, to understand that this is really what's going on behind closed doors, because you're trying to figure out who the real person is. And you think it's up to you to fix them. Even with like the unfaithfulness or the other things that are coming on about their personality, like you, instead of focusing on you, and we all do this, think that somehow we're going to go to therapy and fix them. So yeah, I just think it's important to hear that portion of it.
Well, I thank you for that so much. I do think it's important because I know many of our listeners could be in that very situation right now, and they're just trying to figure out, what to do. And if that is you, I do ask our listeners, please go back and revisit episode 66, because we really talk more about being in that relationship and then initiating the divorce. And so, for today's episode, we're going to talk about after the divorce and co-parenting. And Melissa, are the women who have done that, so they I would say survived that relationship and survived the divorce, right? Had the strength to leave. And now, right, it's not necessarily over, as we all know from anyone getting a divorce with children. There is going to always be a connection. And when the children are younger, minors, there's just a lot more of like required communication and sharing time. So that's a challenge. And that's really what I want to talk about today. In addition, then we'll certainly talk about then, dating and going out there after that. But some of the challenges that, women may face in co-parenting with, a narcissistic ex-partner that, we could talk about, and how they can still do that successfully.
Right. I mean, the transition of going through the divorce, and we did talk about that last time, and kind of what they need to get help to get to that point. So at the point that we'll start with, that you are divorced now, or you're close to getting divorced. And even, I would go back to say to you, like, one of the things I think is most helpful is having a rock solid parenting plan, because that is the Bible of which you need to live by. And that means thinking about everything. And that's hard, which is why you need help. And it could be layers of therapists, coaches, attorneys, all working together. But it needs to be so rock solid, because that's your only guidance that you have supporting, when things start going really crazy. And so having it, I even talk about like what you need today, if they're 3, is not going to be what you need when they're 8 or when they're 13 or when they're 17, right? So like be thinking about this in like 3 to 4 year chunks of time periods of like what I'm going to need in the parenting plan. So that's like, to me, first and foremost, get an amazing parenting plan. Then the next thing I would say is, we say go gray rock, but gray rock means very little communication. And this is speaking as therapist, mother of 3, figuring it out so you don't get drawn in. I mean, I know in the beginning, because I wasn't given guidance on any of this, like I got, drawn into the fights, into the emails of, you're the worst mom ever kind of stuff. Just don't respond to it. There's no reason to respond to it. It only draws you, it only makes you feel less control, more depressed, more upset, trying to figure out like, you're not going to change them. They're not going to change. They're not going to get therapy. They're not going to get help. And even if they go to therapy, they just pretend. So, having you have to, whether you do a shared app, like My Family Wizard, or there's newer ones that are out. So the rock solid parenting plan, having a shared app and calendar that makes it so you have to communicate as least as possible, have drop up and pick up like science.
Right.
So that you just don't have to talk to each other about stuff that would be normal small talk, chitter chatter that you would have that just can go sideways out of nowhere. And if you don't have the resources not to be triggered yet, you're going to get triggered, you're going to get sucked in, and you're going to get into an argument that is just completely unnecessary to draw you into that space. So gray rock, which just means communicate as little as possible, calmly, just don't choose your battles on stuff like this. Those are some beginning basics. I have a lot more, but those are some beginning basics.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned the, various apps for our listeners. There are so many apps out there that you can use on your phone, and they are widely accepted by the courts. So it's something that is, if if you and he can't agree, it's very rare that the court won't order that, because it, in a high conflict relationship, and really, frankly, in any, even if it's not high conflict, it's just an ease of communication about everything related to the children that is really helpful, but even more so in a high conflict, because, it seems like, well, it won't matter what time I sent it, or, so many things can be manipulated with technology. And from the lawyer's perspective, when there's evidence and things aren't fully complete, that's the beauty of many of these apps that and computer programs that really are making it more possible, or that's not a word, more possible. They are improving your ability to communicate, because it doesn't have to be verbal.
Right.
And it's all documented, and that is very effective.
I agree. And I also feel like it puts more eyes on it, that they know that it can be used for the courts, because so I feel like everybody tends to behave better on apps where they know that, people are watching, frankly. And it's just that it's an ease of use. So why wouldn't you use a tool that's ease of use? Some people are like, oh, I don't want to pay for it. But you know what? It puts it all in one place. And the other thing that I say is, you don't have to read your email right away. Like text messages, right? Like the idea that you have accessibility to each other's text messages, I think is just nonsense, because all it's going to do is something's going to be said and it's going to trigger you, and then it's going to mess up your workday. Like, just stop all of that. Yeah. And I say, okay, if you will not pay for an app, then just use email. Don't even let text messaging be a part of your everyday communication. Either pick up the phone or use email. I think the apps are the way to go. We didn't use the apps. I wish we had. It would have saved me so much heartache, time, effort, all of that. It is the way to go.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about, this is something that I want you to weigh in on, because I've had this experience, and so have all of our attorneys with our clients. And this is I'm going to give you this scenario, right? The example on the co-parenting. And we've got the wife, and she is coming to me, Heather, he never follows the parenting plan, right? He's supposed to be there, say, on Thursday at 5. He always wants to move the time. he's moving it to the next day, or, he can't exercise his time, or he wants to move the time. And I'm dealing with this, 2-3 times a month. And it's always got to be his way. And he wants all of this, a flexibility. And so from the legal standpoint of, where we are, it's hard to advise a client that in and of itself is worth trying to go to court over, because it's going to be difficult. It's going to take a long time. And unfortunately, the court may see that as very petty. Mm-hmm. Although you and I understand it's about control very often. And it just, it's usually, it builds on it. However, the likelihood of succeeding in court, and is that worth it? Because, they love a fight. And so then the narcissist is like, great, excited to have that fight. But I'd love to hear from you, what would you advise women, or how can they deal with that? Because we both know that happens.
Right. And I have personal experience with this. And so I've tried lots of different things, and I would say you get creative. One is, I think I just accept that, and you may not always be able to do this, but I prepare myself, came to the conclusion that this is what I needed to do, which was, it's okay if in the end I have to pick them up on that day. Like, instead of getting mad about it, just accepting it. And whether I need to get childcare, whether I have a support system where somebody's going to help me, like having backup. But I think it's also going to them and requesting that they have backup as well. So are we going to have shared backup? Depends on the narc, whether they're going to be willing to have that conversation or not, right? But as far as making it seamless for your children, and you not carrying the frustration over trying to change them, because you're not going to change them. So you kind of have to put your big girl pants on and decide, okay, either I'm going to make the decision that I'm just going to be the one to pick them up, if that's what it's got to be. You could ask them for something in return, like, okay, if I'm going to do this, can you do this? So in exchange, but you don't want to get too much of that, because then it takes away from the parenting plan, and then it just turns into a big mess. So change for change, ask for an exchange for an exchange if you can. If you can't, then the idea comes into play where you say, okay, if you can't pick up on these days, or you can't do your part, then we need to hire somebody to do it. If you genuinely are at work and you can't do it. I'm not saying that they're going to sign up to pay for it, but I think that this is where, the parenting plan should probably have in there something about, if the child isn't picked up on these days, and the expectation would be that we hire childcare and the cost of the childcare goes accordingly, and agree to that ahead of time, agree to these things ahead of time. If you're caught in the middle of it now, it's just that you're either going to have to use your support system, hire childcare, or a neighbor, like carpool with a neighbor. I mean, that's one thing that I did a ton of, carpool with a neighbor. You have to just get creative.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is really important, because at the beginning of the show, or towards the beginning of the show, I think, you said, even if your, ex-narcissist goes to counseling, right, they're just going to lie, get through it, right? It's not going to change. And I would imagine the acceptance of that is probably a powerful tool, when just because you're like, I know it's going to be this way.
At least you have an answer. At least you have an answer and an expectation, and to figure out how to manage it. So then that kind of gets you to have your control back. I think what's tricky from when I was in it early on, that none of this was really said in this way. It was really always like with a therapist, like, well, how do you navigate? We always were like coming outside of the box, like trying to negotiate it, navigate it. But I couldn't understand why he was behaving this way. So like, you just think they're being stubborn, or they're just being, a jerk, or they're just choosing not, and they are. I'm not saying that's true. But when you finally get to acceptance of, well, this is actually, and again, this isn't me diagnosing any of them. If I'm, if they're not in front of me, I can't do that. But it's accepting that is who they are, and that's probably not going to change. And the person that's going to have to change is you. And so just accept that, and you will have so much more joy in your life. Instead of fighting so many fights, just move on. Like just
Mm.
handle the situation, come up with different plans and move on. I know it's frustrating. I get it. But you know, the only other option is to sit and fight and argue with them and be in court all the time, which is a no-win situation. So you
And it
just,
really is. They're only, I think, and that's why it's important, why I mentioned that in the beginning. That would be that isolated issue, which is frustrating and can impede your job and can impede a lot of things. It's just still, we have to weigh the pros and cons of trying to go to court to enforce something. And it just, that may not give you the relief or the result you're looking for. And I think that's why, like, exactly what you said, Melissa, is accepting the reality of that is your children's father, your child's father. It's probably going to continue to happen. So let me figure out how my response is going to be so that I feel like I do well, what you do, you always have control of how you're going to react, but knowing it's coming, and then just be like, I'm not going to be fazed by it. I'm going to just pivot and make it
and
work.
here's the thing, a little therapy tip. It's just called radical acceptance. It's a DBT skill, which is accept that which you cannot change.
That is brilliant. And so healthy, right? Not always easy, but a very healthy way to help yourself move forward. Now, let's talk about boundaries, because that's important in all relationships and very important in all relationships, period. But particularly in this.
Yes, especially in this, and especially as you role model for your children, right? Because a lot of what I say when it comes to the kids, and we'll talk about this later, but setting the boundaries around what's acceptable and what's not acceptable behavior, right? That also helps you feel like you have more control. That also helps you make you feel like you have, like, just coming at this in a healthier way instead of this toxic, negative way, right? So you're setting the example and role model for your children to set boundaries, because as a narcissist parent, they will do the same thing with the kids. You can't change the fact that it's a parent and they're a narcissist. You can't change that. All you can do is teach them skill sets. So the same thing for yourself. So boundaries are really important. And boundaries is such a big, broad topic, but boundaries around, pick up and drop off, boundaries around your personal time, boundaries around blowing up your phone. All of these are really, really important to reestablish the boundaries of what is healthy and what is, good behavior, respectful behavior. And that's the part that I feel like we as the survivors have control over. They're going to try and go over the boundary.
Right.
Their job is just to kind of gently push it back. Not fighting it. Just say, hey, this is my space. This is my boundary. They still might have a meltdown about it, but the more you start pushing the space to create the boundary, the more likely over time, and I'm not saying it's, something that happens in a snap, it doesn't, that they understand where they can push you and where they can't.
And that, I think it is. It's so important. And I think as an individual, recognizing and establishing boundaries is so important. And then you can recognize when, okay, that's going beyond and I'm not going to allow that, or this, all right, I'm going to have some flexibility here. But again, that's then you in control of where they're going to go and what you're going to enforce.
And in control of your emotions. When the boundaries are crossed, you gotta keep your emotional regulation on. You can't both be dysregulated in this, right? So he's always going to be dysregulated. He or she is always going to be dysregulated. So it's going to be your job to be the regulated one, and just make the decision that you're just not going to get triggered. It's so much easier said than done. I promise you that.
Yes.
You can learn over time how to not get triggered and give different responses. To remember, one of the things that I always say is just because they say it does not mean it's fact. So like if you just pretend 90% of what they're going to say is just going to be untruthful information and you tell your brain that, then you respond accordingly. Like, oh, well, that's just what you do. You just give dishonest information, and that's okay. Like, I don't have to control that. And I also don't have to react to that.
That's the big one, right? You can be in control of your emotions and not reacting. And I think that's also, again, an example of modeling and helping your children, because that's what we're talking about in the co-parenting, because otherwise you wouldn't have to have really any contact with them. But your children are going to need to learn how to cope and deal with their father on this issue as well. And we talked briefly before we started the show, but I always advocate for therapy, and, you know, definitely for our clients, for women, but always for their children, to give them a safe space. And I know you mentioned that. I wanted to talk a little bit just about, you know, when you're co-parenting with a narcissist, how important it is for that your children have a space and some therapy.
And right. And I said that to you earlier, them being in therapy is just as important as you being in therapy, right? Because they also have to learn how to have a voice in all of this.
Yeah,
and be heard. So I think coming from a third party, when things start blowing up, it's much more effective to be heard by the spouse that is struggling around basic rules and boundaries. That if a therapist or a third party kind of comes in and says, hey, this is what your child needs, you know, not, you know, one common thing said a lot of the time, yelling, name calling in the house. And that's something that I just like say as a rule. No one can yell, and now we're parents and no one can name call. But I'm probably not surprised at the things that are said to their kids, but you know, these are basic rules that everybody should be following. So if there's, you know, the child's in therapy and the child can speak on some of this, or it just depends on the age about how verbal they are, not verbal they are about it, or do they feel scared to talk about it? You know, it takes time to develop rapport and be able to get into the ins and outs of this. But how powerful is it if a child can actually say to their parent, hey, like, you yelling at me all the time, it's creating issues, or I don't feel good about myself. Or if you name call me, you know, or they're not going to use that word, but when you call me this name, you know, it hurts my feelings. That's, you know, teaching them that skill set to have boundaries, to have a voice, are the two most powerful things that they can have, and the two most powerful things that you can role model for them as well.
I think that's great. And that's so very important, because yeah, your children are going through it as well, and they're having a different experience, but they're still experiencing it. Okay. So we're going to pivot a little bit, because I think this is such a great topic. So you're co-parenting, you're divorced, and you're ready to date, but you know, you were married to a narcissist. And I think I can just let you roll with that there, Melissa, but like, help our listeners understand, what do they need to do to prepare for that, and when they start dating, and how do they avoid the same mistake?
Yeah, I mean, and this is such a hot topic. And I feel like I'm actively working on writing about it and working on it and talking to people of all ages. And you know, Sandra Brown has a book on how to let me come back to it. How to avoid dating a dangerous man, I think is what it's called. How to spot a dangerous man before you get involved. How to spot a dangerous man before you get involved. I think reading that is important, but that focuses on behaviors and red flags and things like that, right? So some of it is obvious, some of it is not obvious, some of it is very clinical, but it can be read by anybody. So I feel like, just if it's not her book, some kind of book like that kind of lays out for you all the different kinds of, frankly, dangerous people out there. Now, I say that to say there are a lot of good people too, Heather. I mean, I don't want to paint the world as everybody's a narcissist, because they're not. Or has narcissistic personality disorder. I think because you come with your own trauma, your own family history, your own divorces, you know, how you came through the divorce and the therapy that you received, right? Like that's your baggage that you carry. And it's kind of hard to see clearly in all that, right? So the other thing that I think is like be in therapy, get a dating coach, get a professional on board. Do not ask your friends. I am going to say, I feel like that was a mistake on my end.
Okay.
And I'll come back to that. But I want to start with some things that I feel like I really worked on figuring out how to do dating post-divorce in the
Okay.
healthiest way possible. And the first thing that I'm going to say is go slow, go painfully slow.
Right.
And no one wants to do that. Everybody wants to fall in love tomorrow. They want the Disney story. They want true love after all. But the problem is that if you don't go painfully slow, and Heather, when I mean terribly slow, I'm saying months of working more on a friendship and not going into having sex and all these other things that changes your brain chemistry, that's going to blind you to what's going on. You have to know who this person is. And one of the things I say about like these dating matchmakers is that you don't know what you don't know. And they're only connecting you on this level of interview, they passed a background check. Well, whoop-de-doop-de.
Right. Yeah.
You know, these are, you know, you're dating, and at some point, obviously not right away, you're introducing these people who are strangers into your lives, your family, your children, your personal assets. You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't think twice about it, and we give too much trust. And so when I say go painfully slow, I really mean this. Go painfully slow. And when those yellow flags start kind of coming up, talk to a professional about it. Am I seeing this
Right.
clearly? Is this my baggage? Don't ask a friend. Please, for the love of God, do not ask a friend, because the friend has their own baggage and can't see stuff and may say, oh, I didn't, you know, like give them a break. You know, you're being too hard on something. If you've already divorced and come through this lifelong, you know, space of just so much trauma in your own life and trying to reset yourself and be as healthy as you can be, we should all understand the importance of going slow, and that love will come, but the friendship and the foundation is the most important part of this beginning dating, whatever you want to call it, relationship. You know, it's not really a relationship at that point, it's just dating. So I just can't say it enough. Go slow, go slow. I mean, I would write a book that's just called Go Slow. The reasons why.
Which, and I know that's why you have to keep saying it, because of course that's
No one
not
does.
what anybody wants to do.
No.
Right? They're like, no, I'm ready. I've come out of this fog and this relationship, and you know, I'm just ready to be in love and meet somebody, and that can be like the worst thing, right? Because then they've got the rose-colored glasses. They're just not really allowing enough time.
Yes. To allow enough time to really understand who they are. And I'm, you know, the go slow phase, I'm going to say is months. I'm going to say 3, 4, 5 months. I want you to go slow. And people are going to be like, that's crazy. But I'm telling you, that's how you start figuring stuff out before you get, you know, you learn more and hear things and see things and question things, to be able to ask others about it. So I'm like in capital letters, go slow, go slow. Here's another thing that, as far as dating and asking and sorting through stuff, do they have friendships? Do they have friendships, long-standing friendships? Do they have friendships that are from high school, from college? They're still communicating and hanging out. If they found a friend that they didn't know or hadn't seen in years and years and years, could they go and just go have lunch with that person? You know, tell me about these friendships. When's the last time you saw them? Doesn't mean like, oh yeah, I had a friend whatever its name is, but we haven't spoken in, 15 years. That's, you're not maintaining that friendship, right? So friendships, I think, tell a lot about a person. It's like, are you able to have a relationship? Are you able to have a long-standing relationship? People that are lying and dishonest are going to break a lot of friendships through time. Does that make sense?
It does. I think and I'm just like pausing because I think that's huge in really getting to know this person that you may want to date, be more than friends with. And, and really, frankly, for, these women, like opening your heart again, right? Like it's a lot. It's a lot of grieving. You've ended a relationship, you had to have a divorce, and you ought to protect yourself because you're worth it and you're worth protecting. And I just think of the shows that I've seen on TV or the portrayals of these people, and they don't have friends, right? The narcissists, they don't. They're very isolated. They don't introduce you to their family or friends, and there's really nobody there for you to kind of see what kind of person they are.
Right. And it should be a red flag is what I'm saying. Like a giant red flag. And where it gets confusing is that people think that coworkers are friends. Well, they can be.
Right. They can be, but not the same.
Right. But if your friends are just the, colleagues that you work with, well, then I'm going to say that's a red flag. And these are questions I feel like you can ask so easily in the beginning of getting to know somebody. This isn't even asking super personal information, but you know what I mean? So asking some of these questions, and then relationships that continues to go on with the relationships. What is your relationship like with your parents? What's the relationship like with your adult children? Some of these men have so gone the full circle of trying all these different tactics to maintain the relationships, but at the end, they've just given up the relationship and they are not connected to their adult children. To me, red flag. If they do not have a relationship with, and I'm not saying there aren't things that happen in life, so I can't apply that 100% in every 100% way, but generally speaking, they should have relationships with their adult children, or college children, or high school teenage children, relationships with their siblings. These are all just so important. And again, kind of easy questions to ask. You're not getting into the weeds on like, oh, tell me all about your divorce. I mean, these are just simple questions.
Simple questions
about somebody's past relationships.
Let me just ask you this one thing, just because I thought of it, and that, that is really good. So I, have had a front row seat to several marriages and divorces just through with my parents, right? So how about the guy, right, who doesn't have a relationship with his adult children or teenagers, whatever, and it's all his ex-wife's fault, right? How often have you heard that? Because I think my mom might have, married a couple guys who had that thing. And then she was like the rescuer. So she thought in repairing all of these, relationships and stuff, but it was really him. And that, I think, is a great piece of advice.
I feel like you have to decide, is that what you want the relationship to be about? You want to be the rescuer? You want to be the one who relationships back together? And you have to know it's only going to be for a certain period of time that you're involved, right? Because you're the one offering the empathy. You're the one offering the solutions. You're the one offering how to care and get connected and, all of that. I know from my marriage number 2, he was disconnected with his sister when I met him. And I had said to him at some point, I didn't take it as a red flag. I took it as like, oh, let me help you. Connected with her. Relationships are so important. You should be connected to your, adult siblings for different reasons have relationships that ebb and flow. But overall, these relationships should be connected on some kind of level. One of the things I was going to talk to you about in talking about this, just don't forget, when you've divorced your covert narcissist, one of the things that they do during the teenage years is they buy them lots of stuff because they've learned over time that they need to like reconnect with them. So I'm just putting this out there as, you know, pay attention to the relationships that they have with their current children and ask questions and understand the connections and just kind of ask a lot of open-ended questions to get more information about connection with the ex. And, you know, I don't know how you feel about this because I've been toying with this idea. You know, women don't ask, and I know what you're going to say, but women don't ask the ex-spouses anything about what happened, right?
Yeah.
And I wish there was a way for women to connect differently because it would save a lot of people a lot of heartache.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you know, I'll give you one little example in dating where I asked, had they ever been unfaithful? And the answer was no. And I said, well, if I asked your ex-wife, were you unfaithful? Well, guess what? The answer was different.
Yeah.
So maybe think about how you ask questions and don't be afraid to ask the questions. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that people steer away from asking things about infidelity. And listen, I'm not saying that if someone's been unfaithful, that means they're going to be unfaithful for the rest of their lives. They can choose to do the work. They can choose to put themselves in and get better as long as they don't have a personality disorder. If it's just about being disengaged at some point in the marriage and it's gone south. So I'm not trying to say that's just a symptom. Infidelity is a symptom of a bigger issue.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just say, ask the questions, ask a lot of open-ended questions. And the last couple things I was going to say about dating is focus on being healthy. Like focus on your own friendships, focus on your own life, focus on doing the self-care for yourself, focus on the self-care for your children, focus on your job and your career and being healthy and, you know, working out and eating good. Focus on all of that as your main life if you're still raising your children, instead of trying to figure out how to like jump into a relationship. And I'm not saying don't date. I'm just saying self-care, being healthy, make good decisions, and have lots of friends. That's what's going to grow you as a person. And you want to meet somebody where you are, right? If you're at a point in dating and you're not your full self, then you're going to attract people that aren't their full selves. So you want to attract somebody that's where you are. So focus on you.
Yeah, that is, I think, just such great advice because I think that a lot of women, you know, there is obviously that fun, you know, part, you meet somebody and then you kind of forget everything that maybe you went through on one hand, and then just don't want to ask the questions that really should be asked. And maybe you don't want to know, oh, I want to hear just what he says about his divorce or his last relationship versus, well, why don't you ask a little deeper, like you said? Because, you know, it's like, what are you afraid? Like, you're afraid to hear the answer now because you just want a person. And so you're thinking it should be this person right now versus when you find out the hard way later, it's going to be worse.
It's going to be way worse. And listen, this is about learning how to communicate in a healthy way, having good boundaries. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying ask these questions on date one, but I'm saying don't be afraid to ask the questions. And I can't tell you just in general, whether it's therapy, dating, friendship conversations, how people don't ask the questions. They really just force the relationship, force the chemistry, like all of that versus building the foundation. And if you don't build the foundation, it's going to blow up anyway. So what's the point? You have, you know, all these 2-3 month relationships at the end of the day are going to blow up because there isn't enough foundation there anyway.
Well, and I think, you know, the whole thing is here today with the dating, right? You've been through a lot, and it's like, don't forget what it took, you know, what you've been through, what it took for you to leave. And, you know, you're on the other side. I know that all of us, I think all humans, you know, we want to do better, you know, and you do better when you know better. Yes. So, you know, educate yourself, get yourself in therapy to where you're in recovery and you're understanding that, and then ask the questions and maybe be a little bolder or more inquisitive than you were like the last time. But
Yeah.
if they don't like you, you'd rather know now, right?
Always. I always say that it takes two to tango, right? And at the end of the day, I only want to be with somebody that wants to be with me too. And you should be the same.
Yeah.
Like, you think of enough of yourself or love yourself enough. That's self-love that,
Right.
that you deserve to be able to be with somebody who can have these important conversations, and if I were to wrap up two things, I go back to the slow, because if you are slow, we'll figure these things out, because a covert narcissist even can only put that mask on for so long. He's going to get irritated with this game of like no sex, no going into this big chemistry thing. They're going to fall off to the wayside. They're going to get irritated and just bored, right? That's, like being a friend, like they're not gonna be interested in that. So going slow, and then just asking, like, don't count on your friends as your network to help you in this dating hooroo, because it's really hard to navigate and everybody's got their own baggage. And I those two things I just can't say enough. Do not count on your friends. Talk about the fun stuff with your friends, or fun and funny, whatever. But like, if you're really stuck on like, is this a flag? Am I noticing it? Is this bad behavior? Is this a yellow flag? Is this a green flag even? Like, talk to somebody who can like ground you and talk about boundaries and bring you back to where you need to be in that self-love space. If you start like, not protecting your boundaries enough because you kind of find yourself being sucked back in. As long as you don't get to that brain chemistry of love addiction, you can still pull yourself back out.
Well, I mean, and that is so great. And I think, all right, I know we're almost out of time, but I have a couple questions because, maybe some people are listening are like, oh my gosh, Melissa, I'm never dating again. Like, that just sounds so hard. So what would you tell them? What would you advise those women?
Oh my gosh. I would say a couple of things to that. First of all, yes, there are a lot of amazing people out there, and that you cannot lose hope. And that if I say dating slow, you should take that as me giving you a gift, because that's learning somebody more slowly. And that's learning yourself even in the process as you're kind of going through this. Like, I'm giving you the gift of taking it slower to understand how important this is, so you can slow it down, so you can get to know this person in a more organic, whole way, not just the sex piece, not just the chemistry piece, but the whole entire man he is or woman she is. So I say that's still fun. Just do it differently. Just do it differently.
Which is great, because then you can show up differently, and then it'll probably be a different and hopefully better relationship.
Yes. And think about also the role model you're setting for your kids to see you doing it differently. Not just, I have a whole set of rules about parenting plan and when you should introduce kids to, but on a whole, if you're focused more on your friendships in life, then this is part of, instead of just guys that come in and out of your life. Some people, it's not something I do, but I know that it's done, and women struggle with this, that it's important that your kids see you show up as a good role model, and how you navigate all of this, because this is how they're going to navigate dating.
Exactly. Because they're paying attention, and who's their best teacher, or who's their most closest teacher. They may not be the best, but they're going to follow it.
They're going to follow it. They're the role model.
Absolutely. Well, Melissa, before we go, can you impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience through your career?
Well, so that there's so much to that. And there's so many things that I want to say. And so I'm just trying to like keep it short and sweet. But like, one is that women are learning to take their power back. And I think that that's part of it in this process, that they do have true grit, that they do have the fight in them to come out of this. It is not easy. This is not an easy divorce. This is not an easy come out of this. but that they have the ability to do this, you know, for their kids. And I've said this to you before, for their kids and their kids and their kids, that this is just so important, that strong women give their best in all aspects of lives, right? And so with that comes sometimes decisions that aren't good decisions, but now we have learned and we can do it differently. And the idea of learning to go slow and these different kinds of things of doing life just differently. So I guess I would just say, end it on that note of, you know, strong women give their best in all aspects. And I think that that's just an important takeaway. And as a role model, as a woman, that's what you want to teach your kids as well.
Awesome. I love that. Now, Melissa, where can our listeners find out more information about you?
Obviously. So my website, jaxbchcounseling.com, where I have an entire page on survivors of narcissistic abuse. It talks about co-parenting. It talks about the dance of the cycle. It talks about recognizing a pathological love relationship. There's so many things that is there for you to find, how to co-parent, parallel co-parent, just lots of different ideas on there. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. And for our listeners, we will definitely make sure all of that is linked in our show notes. And we have reached the end of our show today. Thank you so much, Melissa Dionne, for joining us and really talking about co-parenting and dating after narcissistic abuse.
Heather, thank you as always for having me. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you. Listeners, if you or someone you know is going through a divorce or is thinking about a divorce in the Northeast Florida area, please reach out to us at floridawomensLawGroup.com or join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. You'll find the links in the episode description below. And if you enjoyed the show, we'd truly appreciate a 5-star review to help other women going through similar challenges find us. We value your feedback, so please share your thoughts on today's episode. And thank you all for listening. Are you facing the challenges of divorce and feeling overwhelmed? Introducing Divorce 101, your essential online course designed to empower you through the divorce process. I'm Heather Quick, attorney and CEO at Florida Women's Law Group. Gain confidence and clarity with expert guidance on legalities, financial considerations, and your emotional well-being. We believe in empowering you to navigate this journey with strength and knowledge. Enroll in Divorce 101 today and take control of your future. As a valued podcast listener, you will get $100 off the course. So please see the show notes for the promo code and the link. You can also find out more at floridawomensLawGroup.com or always call us at 904-567-0121. Divorce for women, by women.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Women Winning Divorce. My goal is to elevate your life and the way you are thinking so that you are best equipped to win at life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe so you automatically get my new shows every week. And I would love to hear from you personally. Come join the conversation on social and join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. We welcome your comments and suggestions. We want to bring you content that helps move your life forward. Women Winning Divorce is the place for an elevated conversation on how women can thrive during times of adversity in order to live their best life.